Michael Brauer uses a lot of parallel compression, similar to the way I work, like similar to the way Andrew Sheps works. Parallel compression shows up in a lot of mixers stuff. We're going to get in next video, not this one, the next one, to exactly what he's doing in the simplest way I can break it down. But on this one, this is the first step. If you can't hear compression, you won't be able to work in that way. Parallel compression won't work for you if you cannot hear what the compressor is doing. In other words, how much is it working? Because that's a big part of parallel compression. Being able to tell how much level you're sending in, like when it's the right level. In other words, too much level, it just slams and you get this square wave, just this flat line, nothingness. And then if you don't hit it enough, it's not doing anything. So in order to get it to actually play back and forth and work for you, you need to be able to first hear compression. Without that, you cannot do the rest. So the way to do that, in my opinion, is actually to pick one compressor and use it on everything. Now, I didn't just come up with this idea of how to learn. This is a way I was taught. This is also the way Michael Brauer is going to explain from this awesome interview he did on the SonicScoop channel with Justin Coletti. Really great explanation, because Michael Brauer couldn't hear compression either. So don't think you're alone if you're coming to the table as somebody who's like, man, I don't know if I could hear it. He said the same exact thing. He started by doubting his ability to even be a great mixer because he couldn't hear compression. So a lot of you who are doing that, don't worry. You could still become as great as Michael Brauer is. All you got to do is stick with it and pick one. You cannot be choosing willy-nilly what compressor to use every time you're doing a mix. Now I'm going to use willy. Now I'm going to use nilly. That doesn't work. You have to pick one, use it on everything, and then you will hear what it's doing. Because the good, the bad, the ugly, it'll all come out if you use it on everything. You'll understand what you're not getting from it, what you miss in the sound. If you don't do that, you won't. So just check this out. Michael Brauer talking about this real quick. Fair use for teaching purposes. Fair use for teaching purposes. Here we go.
A quote from you in some magazine somewhere at some point saying that early on in your career, you couldn't hear the sound of compression. And I think a lot of people have been there, you know, when they're starting off, and that's one of the last things for people to master. At what point did it start to come together for you? And is there anything that people can do to kind of jumpstart that process a little bit? Like, what were the things that finally gave you breakthroughs in being able to hear compression? Do it badly a lot? For a while?
Well, yeah, I did it so badly. I had one engineer, after I'd mixed this record, it was Mike Barbiero, had been called in by management, you know, of the studio. So he got a, you know, he came in, they asked him to listen because the artist had complained that my mix was so tiny that it didn't matter how loud the volume went. It was the same level. So I'm at home and Mike calls me and he goes, so Brauer, come in here. We gotta talk. And I'm like, oh, I hate that word. Mm-hmm. So I came in and he's playing me this mix, which I thought I'd done really well, right? And he goes, so check this out, Brauer. You know, and he takes the volume. Now watch this. I'm gonna make it louder, right? So he makes it louder and I go, oh. He goes, yeah, it doesn't sound any louder. The bottom end doesn't get any bigger. You know, and he goes, now look, now I'm playing it low. Look, it's the same level. And I was like, he goes, what did you do? He goes, you compressed this thing so much that it's practically flatline, which today probably would be sounding great. Right. But that's a side note.
Yeah.
And so I've just about passed out. I mean, all the blood drained from my face, and I don't think I touched another compressor for maybe 6 months after that. But I got to learn. We only had 3 or 4 compressors, and in the beginning, the guys would, you know, say, "Okay, put the LA2A across that." I go, "Okay," and we had LA2A, LA3A, 1176, Roger Mayer, some other esoteric ones, but basically that was it for compressors. We didn't have any Fairchilds at Media. And I go between them and I go, why? I don't hear any difference between your LA3 and the LA2A. And I'm thinking to myself, of course, I'm not saying, you know, I don't hear any difference. I'm like, That's all I could think. I was like, I don't hear why he's doing this, right? And then I started, you know, going to my close friends and going, hey, so who cares between LA2A and LA3A? You know, what do you mean? I go, I don't hear any difference. And then so they say, all right, well, just start playing with them. Just keep playing with just an LA2A on everything for hours. And of course, I lived in the studio. I was there 7 days a week. So if I wasn't on a session, I was doing something, right? I was doing my side projects, which were back then we were allowed to do. And I guess it just happened over time where I started going, oh, I see why the 1176 doesn't sound like the LA2A.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I put it across this guitar, it is more driven, or it's a bit more urgent when I use the 1176. And the same with the vocal. And then if I put all the buttons in, wow, it's even crazier. But I can't get that on the LA2A. So, you know, but I like the LA2A on the bass. Well, not on this bass because it's too syncopated. That it feels like it's not articulating enough anymore, right? So that's how all these things slowly, but it was a frightening experience because I just didn't hear it for the first couple of years. And I like, if I don't hear it, what am I doing in this business?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but bottom line is that I just stuck to it and just hoped that I'd get over it or get past it. And I did. And then, you know, it's ironic because now, you know, I know compressors
Right.
really well.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I made my weakness my biggest strength, you know.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of great stuff in what he just said. It reminds me of something actually about a microphone where somebody once said, if you have one microphone, it's a great microphone because that's all you have. And your ears probably aren't at the level where you could even tell the difference. So any microphone will work. But eventually, once you hone your ears enough, you realize certain microphones are better for certain things because of the characteristics they bring to the table. Because of their design, they push or pull in different areas that make it sound better on whatever you're using it on. They make it sound more suited for any given task at hand, a specific task. Every microphone doesn't work on everything. That's why guys use specific mics on snare, specific mics on kick, specific mics on guitar, on bass, on the vocals. They're all different. Like, they're not all the same mic. It's not a one-trick pony. Just like compression, compressors have sounds to them, and the way they interact with the audio, it's all signal dependent. You send in a certain amount of signal, and what it's doing changes the way those compressors work, changes the way they sound. So when you get stuff that, like, for example, the way he described, use an LA2A on everything. That's the only way you're going to hear it. Notice what Michael Brauer said. He said, all of a sudden, over time, you just hear it. Now, this is the point that I think is so hard for so many people to grasp. You got to not miss the part he said right before that. He's in the studio 7 days a week. If you can't hear compression, odds are you're just not working on enough different stuff. The same song for 2 years is not going to do it for you. You need to use different things so that you can hear different bass lines. Certain bass lines that, like he said, if they're too syncopated and fast, that LA2A is not going to be the right tool because it can't grab all the notes. It's too slow. Whereas an 1176 is fast. That would be a good tool for that. So in other words, you gotta, if you don't do enough stuff, you're never going to hear the thing you need to hear in order to be able to process what it's doing. So just use one tool, one compressor on everything. That's the quickest way to do it, because it won't take as long for you to all of a sudden now be like, I hear what's going on here and I don't like it, or it's great. And then you use something else and now, where did it go? All the body disappeared. Why? Because it's moving too fast. Well, let's use the slower one. Okay, that works great there, but now it's moving too slow. The vocal's too fast for this. Let's put on the 1176. Things like that. All you need is one or two. That's why a lot of people who ask me, like, do you think a plug-in version is the same as, hardware? I would say that when it comes to compressors, the benefit of owning the hardware version of a compressor, especially if you're doing tracking, if you're recording things, the benefit is you will use it on everything because nobody wants to buy 10, 12, 15 compressors. So you will use that one compressor on everything, and you'll just naturally hear what it's doing faster than you will if you have all the choices of pulling up a different compressor every time you feel like it. So it's like the other way requires a lot more self-control. Could you do it? Sure, you could do it. If that's your only option financially, then do it. But just use the plugins. But what I'm telling you, you could use the Bomb Factory plugin, which is a very specific sounding 1176 that comes with a lot of the DAWs if you're using Pro Tools and stuff like that. You could use that. It's been around forever. And I actually heard that Serban uses that sometimes instead of any other 1176 plugin because of the way it sounds. A lot of people, like Andrew Sheps has mentioned this too. If you just flip between the blue stripe, the Bluey 1176 and the Blackie, and then, the Bomb Factory, there's so much difference in sound just on those three, all 1176s, so just saying. But the bottom line is, if you have the self-control to just use one, even though you've got a whole bunch of them, then sure, you could go plug-in style. But I would also tell you that there's something about compression when the sound is a voltage. Before it becomes the ones and zeros in the computer, before it gets digital, there's something about compression in the analog world that just feels, for whatever reason to me, a little more natural, a little more grippy on the whole thing. It's just nicely grippy is a good way to put it. As opposed to the other way, it somehow feels just a little less thorough, a little less real. It's like we're using ridiculous terms because this is one of my favorite quotes. Andrew Shepp said, he's like, trying to describe, I'm butchering what he said, but trying to describe audio with adjectives is like dancing about architecture. One of my favorite lines ever because it's true. Dance about architecture. Right. What does that dance have to do with it? Exactly. And that's the point. I use words like grippy or, total, grips down on the sound. It makes sense to me when I hear somebody say that. It's like, yes, that's exactly what it's doing. It's a more realistic grip that doesn't sound artificial, and it doesn't sound it's not as easily heard, which in my opinion is kind of the goal of compression. As soon as you start hearing it a lot, it's not good. So in this case where you're trying to learn it, maybe it doesn't hurt to use the plugin because it's actually more audible. It's just the things you're hearing aren't necessarily the same things you'd be hearing if it was in a real piece of gear in front of you. And just the tactile functionality on being able to twist the knobs might make you actually be able to process what you're hearing a little more easily. I don't know, just throwing it out there. But I have to say, I learned how to use compression, and I learned how to use it from actually touching an 1176 style compressor. So just that was hugely helpful for me. So how could I tell you it's not? It is. To me, it's helpful. But again, an LA2A style, totally different, and also a very audible sounding compressor because it's so slow. Because of the way it moves and operates, you will hear what that compressor is doing when it's working too hard, probably even more easily than you may hear in 1176, unless you have that thing set with all buttons in, certain ways to set an 1176 that become very aggressive, very hyped. So if you don't have it set in certain ways, it could go unnoticed a little more easily on 1176. And the goal here is actually hearing what it's doing, and then realizing how that applies to to the one other one. So pick one, use it on everything, then have that other one that's kind of the opposite. Either a distressor or an 1176 is a good second one. But that LA2A is so critical to hearing what it's doing. Hope you dug it. Drop something in the comments section. I really appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button. Why don't you? I appreciate it. All right? Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.